Welcome back to another episode of Meet the Lawmaker. Today we are joined with Representative Elissa Slotkin, representing Michigan's 7th District. And Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure.
To start off the interview, just tell me a little bit more about your district and the types of agriculture that are in it.
Sure. So I represent Michigan's 7th District. It's in the middle of the state, so Lansing, Michigan, our capital, and then all the 6 rural counties around it. We have farmers who grow soy, corn, we have dairy farms, and then because we're Michigan, we have a lot of specialty crops. So mint is really big in my district, a couple of other things, and so I spent my early life on my family farm, so it fits right in.
Tell me a little bit more about your family farm. So you do have experience growing up on the farm, but then also your family played a big role in the food business.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about how that upbringing influences how you approach ag and food policy today.
Sure, yeah. So my entire family, great-grandfather, grandfather, father, all my uncles, most of my older cousins are all in the hot dog business. And that's because when my great-grandfather immigrated to the United States, he started a small meat company that became a bigger meat company. We helped start Nathan's Hot Dogs and do all the meat for Nathan's Hot Dogs for the first 50 years, and then moved the company to Detroit in the 50s. Got the first contract to sell hot dogs at Tiger Stadium. That became a popular Detroit favorite, and we turned that into the Ballpark Frank. So everyone's in hot dogs or in some sort of meat, part of the meat industry. And my grandfather, frankly, in the 50s, had finally made it. He was living his American dream as the first generation American, and he wanted the most American thing in the world, which was a farm. And so he bought a 500 head Black Angus beef cattle farm, which is where I spent my early life. And I live there now. We now grow soy and corn. And for me, I think, anyone who spent time around a farm just has a different appreciation for the food that we eat every single day, and understanding you can't take it for granted that we can feed ourselves, buy ourselves. And it informs pretty much everything I do on the Agriculture Committee. I'm a big believer that food security is national security. And I say that as someone who grew up, in that meat business, but also as a former CIA officer, which is my professional life training.
Mm-hmm. So you're not new to Capitol Hill, but you are new to the Agriculture Committee. Tell me why you wanted to have a seat on this committee.
So certainly, my district has a lot of agriculture, but Michigan has a really unique place in the agricultural world where it's a huge part of our state's economy, but we're not Iowa, we're not Kansas, we're not, a place of these super farms that grow one crop. We really are a specialty crop place. Stone fruit, cherries, asparagus, potatoes, just a diversity. And I wanted to make sure that we still had that voice in the Agriculture Committee. I'm the only Michigander on the House Agriculture Committee. We don't have, either Democrat or Republican there. And then, of course, we have our senior senator as the chairwoman of the Agriculture Committee on the Senate side. So I wanted to make sure that we didn't just have people on the Ag Committee from, these states that are kind of monocrop states, and make sure we have that voice up in the big leagues.
So what areas do you see need to be improved on with the Farm Bill coming up, especially now since we are in the middle of Farm Bill season and kind of coming up on the end of the year?
Yeah, it's sort of the Super Bowl for the Agriculture Committee is the Farm Bill every 5 years. And for me, my priorities basically stem from this idea that food security is national security. We should always be able to feed ourselves by ourselves. And therefore, my focus is on 5 things. Specialty crops, because that's what Michigan does, so doing a bunch of work to protect our specialty crop growers. Number 2, research and development in agriculture. I represent Michigan State University. China is eating our lunch on the amount of money they put into ag research. Number 3 is the farm safety net and making sure that's there for all farmers, even some of our smaller farmers. Obviously, making sure we can feed the American people, and making sure in particular SNAP benefits and people who depend on the state for food don't go hungry. And then conservation, and making sure that we don't fall into this trap that you can either be a farmer or care about conservation. You can do both. And often farmers are leading on conservation. So those are my priorities and what I work on every day. And most importantly right now for me is making sure there's enough agricultural land in American hands to feed ourselves for the next generation. So just dropped a bill that says any country like China or Russia or North Korea or Iran that's trying to buy agricultural land, that we have a very strict process that would weed out buyers that have a connection to an adversarial country from buying our agricultural land.
Okay, and I want to dive in a little bit deeper on the national security as food security.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you were recruited by the CIA in the early 2000s, and you have held various defense and intelligence positions underneath President Bush and President Obama. Pulling from that background, what does the country still need to learn or prepare for when it comes to that national security and food security? Agriculture?
I am, we're all captured by our experience, and I'm what's called a 9/11 baby. I happened to be on my second day of grad school in New York when 9/11 happened. And by the time the smoke cleared, I knew I was going to go into national security and, did 3 tours in Iraq alongside the military, worked at the Pentagon, at the CIA. So that's the experience I bring. And then I turned to agriculture. And for me, the aha moment was during COVID, where for the first time, Americans of all stripes were thinking about their supply chains. Like, where does my stuff come from? Am I going to be able to get gloves, gowns, masks at my hospitals? Am I going to be able to get a 14-cent microchip so I can build a car? And in the middle of that, my family, who was in the meat business, was watching all our processing plants go down because everyone had COVID. And they started calling me and texting me in all caps and saying, are we, what is going to happen when Americans go to their grocery stores and see no protein on the shelves? So I really focused at that point on how we take for granted our food supply chain. We just assume that our food's going to show up, that it's healthy, it's made in America, that it's labeled right, and all those things. And I just want to be more deliberate about preserving our food supply chains. I never want dependencies on another country, right? There are certain countries around the world who depend on us for like 30% of their food. I don't ever want to be in that position. And I want to elevate that to a national security issue. And I think it's just that informs the importance I put and the focus I put on agriculture. It's not just a nice to do, it's how we live. And it's a fundamental part of what makes us safe.
Mm-hmm. How do you take your work from what you're doing here on Capitol Hill and then helping to communicate that to the consumer or educate them on the supply chain issues or where their food comes from?
Yeah, well, I think honestly, what ends up happening is if you are actually out and about in your community for 10 minutes, you're gonna hear from people what's going on. And so it just takes me walking down the street to hear from farmers and people in the food industry about how expensive inputs are, right? How they're worried about increased volatility in the weather, right? We just had 3 tornadoes touch down in my district just in the past month. So there's a lot that you can just get from just talking to farmers and being open to hearing from them. Obviously, Michigan State has a huge research arm. I go and visit Michigan State and they're showing me, what they could be doing if they had more research dollars for farmers. So I take my lead from those who are actually doing the work.
Mm-hmm. What prompted you to originally run for Congress and now for the U.S. Senate?
Yeah. So, like I said, I was a national security person. Frankly, I had worked for both Democrat and Republican presidents. I was apolitical. When you work in national security, you're sitting in Baghdad, you have no care at all what someone's political affiliation is. All you care about is like, are you ready? Are you with me when we go out on this dangerous convoy? So I wasn't a political person. After 2016, I just felt like the tone and tenor of politics just took a bad turn. And I grew up in a family where my dad was a lifelong Republican, my mom a lifelong Democrat. Michiganders are very used to that. And suddenly, Thanksgiving dinner would become uncomfortable for a lot of people. So I think it's important that we have a different generation who approaches politics not as like they're my enemy, but just I want to do the right thing for the people that I represent, that I work for them. So I ran as sort of a long shot in 2018. I won. And I've been representing since 2019. And now for this an open Senate seat in Michigan, what my sun and my moon on a lot of what I do is the belief, again, from a security professional's perspective, that a multi-ethnic, multi-racial country like ours must be a place where you can get in and stay in the middle class. Like, that's all people are asking for, is to do well and have their kids do better, be able to succeed. No one wants a handout. No one wants to be dependent on anybody else. So how do we make sure in a diverse country like ours, rural, urban, suburban, with so much going on, that like if you work hard and play by the rules, you do well and your kids do better? That to me is how I orient so much of what I do in Congress and so much of what I hope to do in the Senate.
What advice do you have for farmers who want to meet with you and advocate on certain issues?
Yeah, first of all, call us. We're very approachable. And I have my office in Lansing. I have my office in DC. We have farmer groups come through here in DC all the time. They have come through all the time in Lansing. I tell people, like, I'll meet with anybody, right? And I come from a district where I'm a Democrat who represents a Republican-leaning district. So it doesn't bother me if we don't agree. We're going to listen to each other. I'm open-minded. I'm willing to learn, but I'm at a very basic level available if people want to talk.
And to wrap up our conversation here, we'll end on a fun one, but what do you like to do in your spare time when you're not advocating for your constituents back home?
So if I had a lot of time and didn't have to worry about, the politics of Washington, then I would be out in a canoe paddling the Shiawassee River or any of Michigan's great rivers and lakes. I'm a big paddler. I'm a big angler. Like any time I can be out in the water is my happy place.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you.